Sevilla are going through one of the saddest collapses in modern football, and it's happened way faster than anyone expected. This is a club that not long ago was known for being one of the smartest in Spain. They kept winning trophies, especially in Europe, while also making huge profits. I mean, they won more trophies in 2 years than Arteta has in his entire career as an Arsenal manager. Now though, Sevilla are fighting just to stay in La Liga. For the fans who remember those Europa League nights, that shift is hard to accept. A club that once ruled Europe is now just trying to get through each week. To see how bad things have gone, just look at the numbers over the last few years. In the 2021-2022 season, they finished 4th in La Liga with 70 points. They were still a strong team competing at the top. The next season, they finished 12th, a big drop, and the warning signs started. In 2024, they finished 14th, so things were getting worse. Then in 2025, they finished in 17th place with only 41 points, just surviving relegation. The season after that, the same story. Things really hit a low point in April of 2026, after these guys lost 1-0 to Real Oviedo, who were literally the last place team in La Liga. The fans confronted the team at the airport, shouting at them, and later that night, mass groups showed up at the training ground. It got so bad that the players had to stay overnight there with police protection. These Sevilla fans, I mean, they don't mess around. Now, to really understand this fall, you have to go back to when these guys were running things smarter than anyone else. And that was during the era of Unai Emery and the famous Monchi model. Unai Emery, the man who looks like Severus Snape from Harry Potter, is a man obsessed with football. He would spend hours breaking down the opponent, going over every small detail. Now, reportedly, some players found it too much, but it worked. He turned Sevilla from a solid team into the kings of the Europa League. Under Emery, Sevilla did something that no one had done ever before. They won the Europa League 3 times in a row, 2014, 2015, and 2016. Those 3 years were crazy because La Liga was running European football. Now at that time, everything at the club was working perfectly. The coaching, the scouting, the tactics, it all fit together. Unai Emery didn't care about having most of the ball. They would sit in a mid-block, stay organized, wait for a mistake, and then attack fast. When they went forward, it was quick and it was deadly. Their first title came against Benfica. It was a pretty tight, tough game that went to penalty. The key man was Rakitic. He was the captain and the heart of that team. He had a great connection with the city. He fell in love with Seville and even met his future wife there on his first night. Maybe I should visit too, though I'm not a multi-millionaire who's a famous footballer, so it might be a little bit harder for me to meet my wife. That final was the perfect ending for Rakitic before he moved to Barcelona. A year later, Sevilla did it again. This time the star was Carlos Bacca. I used to call this guy Chewbacca in FIFA because he was a beast. He scored twice in the final and showed exactly what Sevilla were so good at, which was finding talent from South America and turning them into top players. Then the third time they won it might be the most iconic. They faced Liverpool, who were managed by Jurgen Klopp. At halftime, Sevilla were down 1-0 and they looked more finished than Vinny, but Unai Emery changed everything. He must have had a killer halftime team talk, because in the second half, the game flipped. Sevilla came out and scored 3 goals. It was a comeback that really showed their mentality, and it also showed that in the Europa League, this team just didn't lose. They were like the Real Madrid of the Europa League. Sure, the players changed every year, but the system stayed the same, and that's why it kept working. Sevilla weren't building around stars. They were building around specific profiles that they knew worked, which was to get players who were strong, disciplined, and mentally tough. Basically the polar opposite of the current Real Madrid team. That's what made them so dangerous, and that's why for those 3 years, no one in Europe could touch them in that competition. Now, you can't talk about Sevilla's success without talking about Monchi. He basically built the club's entire identity. His idea was simple on paper, but very hard to pull off. Sevilla didn't try to scout the whole world at once. They started small: Spain, Portugal, and France. Once the club made more money, they expanded into bigger markets like Italy, England, and South America. They were looking for players that other clubs were overlooking. Not necessarily cheap players, but players who fit exactly what their team needed. That's how they found gems like Dani Alves, who they signed for almost nothing and later sold for a huge profit. Monchi also followed a clear rule with transfers. About 70% of the signings were young players for their future, while 30% were players ready to perform right away. This created a cycle that just kept working. They would win trophies, they would sell their best players for big money, reinvest in new talent, and then repeat. For almost 20 years, Sevilla were doing both. They were making money and winning trophies. You know, the opposite of Chelsea. That's why Sevilla were seen as one of the smartest clubs in football, because because even after Unai Emery left in 2016, Sevilla didn't fall off, at least not right away. Their system was still strong. That's why under Lopetegui, they became more consistent in the league. They finished 4th in La Liga 3 seasons in a row, which was a big deal for them. Then in 2020, during the pandemic, they did it again, winning another Europa League title, this time beating Inter Milan in the final. That 2020 team had a new core. Players like Jules Koundé, Diego Carlos, and Lucas Ocampos. Koundé and Diego Carlos formed one of the best center-back duos in the world at the time. Eventually, Sevilla sold both of them for close to 100 million euros combined. On paper, that should have been perfect. That money was supposed to restart the whole cycle again, which was to find new talent, rebuild, and stay competitive. But this is where things started to go wrong. The system that had worked so beautifully, like my bidet toilet that washes my bum, suddenly stopped working. And in 2023, the fall of Sevilla began. On the surface, it looked like nothing had changed. Like these guys won another Europa League, this time beating Mourinho's Roma. It felt like the same old Sevilla. At that point, winning the Europa League with these guys, it was like losing your virginity to a prostitute. But that win was hiding a much bigger problem. You see, while they were winning in Europe, their season in La Liga was a disaster. They had gone through 3 different managers in 1 year: Lopetegui, Sampaoli, and Jose Luis Mendilibar. That kind of instability is not good. And for most of the season, Sevilla were stuck in a relegation fight. They eventually finished 12th, but it never felt stable or convincing. That Europa League win was huge for the fans. It gave them something to celebrate in a terrible season. But at the same time, it created a dangerous illusion. It made it seem like everything was still fine, like the team was still strong enough to compete at a high level. In reality though, the problems were already clear. The squad was aging, the club didn't have money, and the transfer system that once made them great wasn't working anymore. So that trophy didn't fix anything, it just covered up the cracks. And once those cracks started to show again, everything collapsed. The biggest issue was the most common issue you see with La Liga team: money. For years, Sevilla's whole model depended on selling players for big fees. That's how they stayed competitive. But after the pandemic, the transfer market slowed down. Suddenly, it became much harder to sell players for 50 to 60 million euro. At the same time, Sevilla were still paying high wages to their older players like Rakitic, Papu Gomez, and even Sergio Ramos. That combination hurt them badly. I mean, the numbers were rough. They lost over 80 million euros just in 2024. They had negative equity over 65 million euro, and their total debt was above 300 million euro. Because of this, La Liga stepped in with strict financial controls. La Liga has a salary cap system, which limits how much clubs can spend on wages. Sevilla's cap basically fell off a cliff, like Vini's talent. When your salary cap is that low, you can't rebuild, because you can't sign top players, you can't replace key departures, and you can't fix weak areas in the squad. You're stuck. So what does Sevilla do? They bring in older players on lower wages, free agents that other clubs don't want. It becomes a deadly cycle. The team gets worse, the results drop, and there's no money to fix it. So right now, Sevilla are basically trapped. They're still paying for past mistakes with no easy way out. Now, while these guys were struggling on the pitch, things off the pitch were even worse. The people running the club were literally fighting each other. At the center of it was a family feud. The president, Jose Maria del Mido Carrasco, also known as Junior, was going up against his own father, Jose Maria del Mido Benavente. The father was a huge part of Sevilla's success in the early 2000s, but his story is complicated. Reportedly, he served time in prison for embezzlement. Now he wanted control of the club back, and he wasn't being quiet about it. Honestly, I thought I was watching Succession all over again. The guy reportedly publicly insulted his own son in meetings, calling him things like a disgrace, and even worse. Yep, this is definitely Spanish Succession. Because of this, the club is basically stuck. Instead of focusing on fixing the team, board meetings just turn into arguments. The shareholders are shouting for people to resign. There's no clear plan, there's no unity, no leadership. And when the people at the top are divided like that, everything below starts to fall apart too. Now, it's not just a family drama either. Groups like 777 Partners have been involved, trying to gain influence. But even they've had their own financial problems and instability, which only made things messier. Then of course you had the end of the Monchi era. For years, Monchi was the guy who fixed everything at Sevilla. If things went wrong, he found a solution. But his second spell at the club, from 2019 to 2023, didn't go the same way. This time, the decisions he made just didn't work. Sevilla spent big money on players like Marcao and Tanguy Nianzou, but both struggled with injuries and poor form. Instead of strengthening the team, those moves made things worse. Monchi also admitted that he made another key mistake, which was holding on to players for too long. He wanted to push for a La Liga title, but that decision hurt the club financially. They missed the chance to sell players at their peak value, and the balance of the whole system broke. So when Monchi left for Aston Villa in 2023, he did not leave behind a strong foundation. There were a lot of problems. Now Victor Orta is trying to fix that, but he has to do it with basically no money. Because of the financial situation, Sevilla have been forced to sell key players for less than they should. For example, Youssef En-Nesyri left for around 19.5 million euros, mainly just to help pay off debt. At the same time, the players coming in are mostly free transfers, loan deals, and cheap signings. There's no real room to build something strong. Before, Sevilla were always one step ahead in the transfer market. Now every signing they make feels like a gamble, and most of those gambles aren't paying off. Their fans have not stayed quiet during this collapse. The ultra groups have led protests against the board. There's a real sense of chaos right now. It feels like the people running the club are just taking it in the wrong direction, more focused on their own interests than actually saving the team. Basically Spanish Chelsea. The story of Sevilla is a warning of how fast things can fall apart in football. Not long ago, they were one of the smartest and most exciting clubs in the game. They showed that you didn't need endless money to win. You just needed the right system. But that system only works when everything is done right. Once Sevilla started overspending, keeping aging players, and let the problems grow inside the club, everything began to collapse. This is not the same team that I watched from 2013 to 2016. It's not even the same team that we watched 6 years ago. The identity is gone, and the success they had feels like a completely different era. What's funny is that Athletic Club are experiencing something similar. To see how their star player Nico Williams went from being one of the most sought after players in the world to somebody that nobody talks about, you have to watch this video right here.